This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Freya Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show.
On today's programme, Zadie Smith's Essays from Lockdown.
And Caitriona Lally, Irish novelist, author of Eggshells, will be in to rise to the toaster challenge.
And we'll be looking at the poetry of Michael Hartnett.
So the coffee's made.
The toast is on.
And the books are on the table.
So up to now, Books for Breakfast has been mainly a virus-free zone, but today, Enda, you've brought in a collection of essays that deals explicitly with lockdown. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I have, Peter. Well, I have to say, first of all, the last thing many people want to do is probably read a book written during this pandemic. But this book, it was written during the early months of lockdown. I wasn't, I have to say, completely convinced about reading it. But I did find this small collection of 6 short essays called Intimations by the well-known UK writer Zadie Smith to be a really fine and wonderful thing. And I have to say, I was grateful to a friend of mine. I met her recently in our wonderful local bookshop, Dubray in Rathmines, and she was going off to find it, and I hadn't really heard about it, so I was really glad to find it. So thanks to her and to Dubray. I'm just putting a shout out there for local bookshops. But as I said, it was written in the early period of lockdown, where Zadie Smith, she's living in New York at the beginning of it. But the essays are so wide in scope. They're so reflective. They're so questioning of the world that we are in. And also, I suppose, of the huge change we're going through and just what might happen next, that I was actually won over by what I read.
So, I mean, essays are really having a moment, it seems. It seems you can't walk into a bookshop without being struck by a new collection of essays. But what is she talking about? You said there are 6 essays. What is she actually interested in?
Well, I suppose you are right. Essays are having a great old time of it with people like Emily Pine and Sinead Gleeson here in Ireland, most especially. We've talked about people like writers like Olga Tokarczuk, writers like that. I suppose Karl Ove Knausgård was the first person to set us all off on that path. But about Zadie Smith, I think her strength as an essayist is that she is writing about what she thinks. And what she thinks is expansive, it's intelligent, and it's surprising, with really, I think, inventive connections of thought. For instance, the opening essay is called Peonies, and she finds herself in New York in what she calls an unexpected position, and she's staring through the bars of the Jefferson Market Garden at tulips. So there are 3 other middle-aged women there too, who she doesn't know at all, and they're staying through the bars. And I like the way she says the predatory way they're ogling the tulips puts her in mind of Nabokov, and then she starts describing the origins of Lolita. This in turn leads her off on a path thinking about womanhood, and in particular what she felt about being a young woman. And then this expands into a meditation on writing and the virus. So I really like the fact that there's great movement to her writing, and you feel you're right in there in her mind in these essays. And well, what's her mind like? Well, from reading it myself, I felt it's a very quick mind. It's someone who isn't actually absolute about what she's saying. I like that. She seems to be figuring out things as she goes along. And this is what makes the essays so attractive to read and also so intimate, I think, so that you actually begin to feel just what it's like to be inside Zadie Smith's head, if you want to be inside it. And just to give you an example, I'll just read you a little bit at the end of this first section where she's talking about womanhood, and she says, whether the natural part of my womanhood is an essential biological fact or an expression, as de Beauvoir argued, of an acculturation so deep it looks very much like roots growing out of the bulb at this point in my life, I confess I don't know and I don't care. I'm not a scientist or a sociologist. I'm a novelist. Who can admit late in the day during this strange and overwhelming season of death that collides outside my window with the emergence of dandelions, that spring sometimes rises in me too, and the moon may occasionally tug at my moods just before an unprecedented April arrives and makes a nonsense of every line. So that's just to give you a taster of the kind of way that she writes.
She mentions in the foreword, she talks about, or she makes a connection with Marcus Aurelius with his meditations. And
yes, there's a very short and crisply written foreword. These are, above all, personal essays she writes. They're small by definition and they're short by necessity. And she goes on to explain that early on in lockdown, she began to read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, not for any academic reason or for pleasure, weirdly, but because she says she needed practical assistance. She says, but I did come out with two invaluable intimations. Talking to yourself can be useful, and writing means being overheard. And in a way, you do feel that when you're reading these essays, that you're kind of overhearing her mind and the machinations of it.
So she's in New York when she begins writing these essays, isn't that right? And she gives us a little bit of insight into the kind of life that she's living in that. So what is she to tell us about being in New York in lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I found this kind of interesting. She's got lots of different sections on America and her feelings on the virus. They're all interesting enough. But what I found was that I was being drawn more to her insights into her writing and her working life in New York. And sometimes these insights, I have to say, are only fleeting, but they did remain with me. For instance, I learned that she liked to write in 45-minute slots, and then she'd take a 5-minute break to go out and get coffee. And so hence you get the sighting of the tulips on one of her breaks. I learned she has schedules. She seems a very organised person. As she says herself, she's got a teaching day, a reading day, a writing day, repeat. And she says, what a dry, sad, small idea of a life. She isn't comfortable with her writing routine either, being disrupted by the virus and everyone at home. And she says, now that the people I love are in the same room to witness the way I do time, the way I've done it all my life, she's not quite happy with that. So those little moments, I think, are really quite interesting.
I'm interested because it's a very slim volume. I mean, there's just 6 essays, and like most of them are pretty short. There's just about 6 or 7 pages, and the penultimate one is split into like smaller sketches that she calls screen grabs. Does it work? This kind of the shortness of the form and these screen grabs. Has she found a new way of writing essays?
Yeah, well, I think actually that these essays are very small. That's true. They're short, but as she says, it was kind of a necessity to write them. But there's a lot going on in such a short pieces, though. They're quite compact. And in the screen grab section, I really liked the variety of lives that she shows, interspersed with her thoughts on life and writing too. There's a screen grab called "A Man with Strong Hands." And then we hear that she suffers from terrible back problems from being at her desk for so long. I think a lot of us understand that feeling. And every other day she goes to get a back massage. But because she's got this intrinsic need to read, she can only have a massage sitting up. So she can still read. And the masseur's name is Ben. And even though she's a regular, he doesn't know her name. He says things like, "Hey, lady, always reading, never relax." And she begins to wonder and worry about him. The high rent of his salon on 6th Avenue below 14th Street, the workers he has to pay. And the essay ends with quite a humane image of him, which I think is delicately done. She says, "Sometimes I would walk past, always being careful to cross the road to the opposite side beforehand, and see Ben standing anxiously by a hand dryer looking out on the street, his optimistic, mystic face transformed from the cartoon I thought I knew into a stern portrait of calculation and concern, responsible for the 15 white-trousered livelihoods behind him and God knows how many more. There he stood, scanning for customers, hoping for walk-ins, or wondering where I was, maybe." So that's the end of that section.
Is there a sense of kind of privilege about that, kind of writing about your masseur?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what you're getting there is she's just really telling you about her life, and she has back problems, and she goes to this guy to get her back pain relieved. I don't think it's privilege so much, and I think actually if there are moments where she does think how lucky I am. So I do think she realizes that she's lucky that she's at home and that she's writing. And in that particular section as well, she does describe herself and Ben having chats about my boy and your boy, and they're groaning about what to do about next Tuesday when the school might be closed. And she says it's not only the false symmetry. The fact that school is closed for Ben's boy is a genuine emergency. For me, it is an inconvenience only. I know Ben knows this. So she does pay attention to that. She doesn't want, I suppose, people to presume she's highly privileged. She is kind of, I suppose, self-critical as well.
And you say, because mostly she's in New York when she's writing these, but at a certain point, she and her family try to get out of the city. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I suppose you're talking about privilege there. She is lucky in the sense that she has been lent a cottage upstate by 2 of her friends. I think they're called Jackie and Jay, and the book of essays is actually it's dedicated to them. She says they're going to go there, and she at the same time she has a homing instinct, and she really wants to get back to London before flights become impossible to get. So again, a lot of very interesting characters come in this section just before she's about to leave New York to go upstate, and she goes to an ATM vestibule to get money out. And there's a really, really, I think, interesting section called A Character in a Wheelchair in the Vestibule. It's a guy called Myron. And you see, when she sees him, she's calling him Myron because this is a name that she gave him, a fictional name in one of her short stories. And she kind of feels a bit guilty about this because he's homeless and legless. And when she sees him in the vestibule, he's holding forth on the craziness of white people. I ain't running from no cold. I survived worst. I survive way worse shit than this, he says. So there is a kind of a tragic comedy to this section. And she also tells us about Barbara. She's an older female neighbour with a dog who everybody knows that this dog bites. And Zadie Smith describes Barbara as an ideal rent-controlled city dweller who appears to experience no self-pity, who knows exactly how long to talk to somebody in the street, who creates community without overly sentimentalizing the concept or ever saying aloud the word community. But of course, everything is different now because the virus has now hit New York, and Barbara says, thing is, we're a community and we've got each other's back. You'll be there for me and I'll be there for you. And we'll all be there for each other, the whole building. Nothing to be afraid of. We'll get through this, all of us together. Yes, we will, I whispered, hardly audible even to myself.
And to end with, Enda, is there a particular bit of this or a part of this collection of essays or a particular essay that you'd say that's your favourite?
Yeah, I mean, I loved the essay Something to Do, where she writes about writing. It's something to do, she says. But really, this essay ultimately is about banana bread, believe it or not, and love. And I think really, Peter, this is best explained by reading a bit from this essay. Before I do, actually, I would just like to...
Banana bread and love, it better be good, Enda.
I know. Well, I think it is quite good, this section, actually. You sound, Peter, as if you need convinced on this collection of essays.
No, I just hate banana bread. I'm interested in the form, and I'm interested in what she has to say. I mean, she's a fine writer, so I would certainly read it.
Okay, right. Well, that's good to hear, because I think this is a hugely humane, it's a vibrant collection of essays. It's well worth, by the way, it's €6.99. It's a steal for that price. Oh, and by the way as well, before I read the section, I really like it, just to say as well that all of her royalties go to charities, and my edition is going to the Equal Justice Initiative and the COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund for New York. So I think that's really, really good. So now I'll read the piece that I really love in a section which is called Something to Do, which is a great way, I think, of describing writing. She says, even if you're working from home every moment God gives, even if you don't have a minute to spare, still all of that time without love will feel empty and endless. So she's saying that writing is good, but really it's love you need. I write because, well, the best I can say for it is it's a psychological quirk of mine developed in response to whatever personal failings I have, but it can't ever meaningfully fill the time. There's no great difference between novels and banana bread. They are both just something to do. They are no substitute for love. The difficulties and complications of love as they exist on the other side of this wall away from my laptop is the task that is before me. Although task is a poor word for it, for unlike writing, its terms cannot be scheduled, pre-planned, or determined by me. Love is not something to do, but something to be experienced and something to go through. And then I like the end where she says, and yet in my case, I can't let it go. All old habits die hard. I can't rid myself of the need to do something, to make something, to feel that this new expansive time hasn't been wasted. Still, it's nice to have company, watching this manic desire to make or grow or do something that now seems to be consuming everybody. I do feel comforted to discover I'm not the only person on this earth who has no idea what life is for, nor what is to be done with all this time aside from filling it.
Thanks for that. And I was talking about Intimations, 6 essays by Zadie Smith, which is just published by Penguin.
And now it's time for the Toaster Challenge, where we invite a guest in to have a chat and then to talk about a book that they really love for the length of time it takes to toast a piece of bread. And today's guest is the Irish novelist Caitriona Lally. Caitriona studied English literature in Trinity. She went on to work in a host of jobs. She was an abstract writer, a copywriter, a home helper in New York, and an English teacher in Japan. Caitriona now lives in Dublin with her husband and her 2 children, and her debut novel, Eggshells, was published in 2015 to great acclaim. The novel was shortlisted for Newcomer of the Year in the Irish Book Awards 2015, and in 2016 was shortlisted for the Kate O'Brien Debut Novel Award. But she's also won the 2018 Rooney Prize for Irish Literature, awarded in association with Trinity College Dublin. And quite recently, in November 2019, it was announced that Caitriona had been awarded the 2019 Lannan Literary Fellowship for Fiction, worth $100,000 American dollars. Previous Irish recipients of this award included Sarah Baum and Kevin Barry. So reviews of Eggshells include the Guardian's review. They said it was inventive, funny, and ultimately moving. And the New York Times book review declared it was wildly funny. So it's no wonder really that Eggshells has received such high praise for its quirky telling of the story of Vivian, an oddball, an unemployed orphan living in her grand aunt's house in North Dublin. She's a character with lots of amusing things going on, including eating blue food, wishing people happy Christmas in April. And I love the bit in the book where she finds a friend, not in any usual way. She finds her friend by taping a sign to a tree reading, "Wanted, friend called Penelope, must enjoy talking because I don't have much to say." So you can see, if anyone who hasn't read the book out there, you can see why Wales Arts Review said of Vivian, Caitriona Lally has created a character of almost maddening originality. Caitriona Lally, you're very welcome.
Thanks a million, Enda. Great to be on here.
It's great to have you here. Well, let's start off then. Vivian in Eggshells is a wonderfully eccentric, original character. So how did the character of Vivian first come to you, Caitriona?
I think it was that feeling of not belonging. I wrote it a year I was unemployed, laid off from a job back in 2011, so a long time ago now. But I just had that feeling of not fitting into a group. And she came about when I had time to kind of wander around Dublin and look at things differently. And I was looking at street signs and shop fronts and just kind of observing conversations and seeing how this character could observe the world through a different lens without having friends of her own. She just had time to observe.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I know that you yourself, you've traveled extensively around Europe, Asia, the Middle East, South America. But it's so interesting then that it was Dublin that you returned to and you mapped it. And I think one reviewer said it reminded them of Ulysses, which is a huge compliment, isn't it?
Yeah, daunting, yeah.
When Eggshells first came out, she received really great reviews, but there was overwhelming media attention around the fact that you also work as a cleaner in Trinity College. Now, to me, this particular interest smacks of class and snobbery, a distraction from the wonderful book itself. But how did it make you feel, Caitriona?
I was a bit shocked by it, to be honest. Like, I remember the first literary festival I spoke at, and I was given a talk on writing, and I was talking away about the book, not thinking anything of my job. And then one of the questions was, well, what do you work at, or do you have a job? And when I said I was a cleaner, well, from then on, all the questions were about the cleaning job. So, I mean, I can kind of see the interest. Like, it is an unusual choice, maybe. I haven't gone down the teaching route, mostly because of lack of self-confidence. I don't have the presence to stand in front of a group. But it suits me. It suits my lifestyle. It's part-time work. It's physical work. It's absolutely stress-free. I worked there when I was a student, and I just went back. And some of the women I worked with then still work there, so it was kind of the easy path for me, I think.
Yeah, and it sounds like a perfect. I mean, I'd say your hours are they like? I'd say you have enough time then to write. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think that's the theory of it anyway. So I finished by 9:30 in the morning, and I think the idea was that I'd go home and write up a storm, but that that hasn't happened. I've fallen into bed so many times and get distracted by other things. But yeah, on a good day, it works.
Yeah. And in the book as well, talking about maps, Vivian, she goes off to find places that are portals into another world. There's the idea of the changeling as well, a magic element to it. Do you believe in those kind of things? Are you attracted to the magic other world?
Not really. I
Yeah.
kind of used it as a device just to, like, I made myself look at Dublin differently, like look at Dublin through the eyes of this person who believed in magic. I kind of liked that idea because at the time I was feeling really negative about Dublin. And obviously, with the recession coming here, we're going to see more shop closures and everything. And that's kind
Yeah.
of how I saw Dublin, was being this grim place where, you know, it wasn't providing jobs for people. And then I liked looking at the world through this magical lens, but it's not my natural habitat, I think.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And I suppose as well, like it came out in 2015 and you've two young children. It's hard to write, I suppose, when you've got young children, but you've still, I think you've managed to move on a bit. I know that you have other projects coming up. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm two projects just starting now this month. I'm working on a screenplay for Eggshells, which is great. We've got funding from Screen Ireland to go ahead with the writing part of it, which is brilliant. And
That's
it's
very
just been,
exciting, isn't it?
yeah, it's been brilliant learning something completely different. Like, I haven't kind of learned something new in writing in a long time, so I'm back to being a swotty student again, which I love. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, I'm working on editing for the second novel, which it took me about 5 or 6 years to write, and I finally handed it over to a capable editor, and they'll work with me now, which is a relief, I
Oh,
think.
that's fantastic, Katrina.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
I would imagine that the second novel is always a hard one to kind of push forward, but it
Yeah,
sounds like you're on the way, so well done.
thank you.
And is the second novel set in Ireland?
No, this one is set in Hamburg. I kind of felt I'd done Dublin to death and I wanted a new city. So Hamburg. I just was visiting a friend there randomly and thought I loved the port area and this model railway exhibition I really loved. So I kind of decided to set the book there.
Oh, it sounds very interesting. And also, I can imagine Eggshells. It's so visual. I can imagine it being a really great, great movie. So, Katrina, it would be absolutely lovely to hear you read a piece from the book so listeners can get a sense of it.
Great. I'll read the opening passage. When I return to my great aunt's house with her ashes, the air feels uncertain, as if it doesn't know how to deal with me. My great aunt died 3 weeks ago, but there is still a faint waft of her in every room, of lavender cologne mixed with soiled underthings. I close the front door and look around the house with fresh eyes, the eyes of a new owner. My great aunt kept chairs the way some people keep cats. There are chairs in every room, in the hall, on the wide step at the bottom of the stairs, and on the landing. The 4 chairs on the landing are lined up like chairs in a waiting room. I sometimes sit on one and imagine that I'm waiting for an appointment with the doctor or confession with the priest. Then I nod to the chair beside me and say, "He's in there a long time, must have an awful lot of diseases or sins. Ha." Some of the chairs are tatty and crusty, with springs poking through the fabric. Others are amputees. There are chairs in every colour and pattern and style and fabric, except leather, which my great aunt said was the hide of the devil himself. I go into the living room and sit in a brown chair and examine the urn. It's shaped like a coffin on a plinth. I chose it because death in a wooden box is more real than death in a jar. I shake it close to my ear, but I can't hear a thing, not even a cindery whisper. I prise open the lid. The scratch of wood on wood is like a cackle through the ashes, the last laugh of a woman whose mouth never moved beyond a quarter smile. I've seen people on television scattering ashes in significant places, but the only significant places in my great aunt's life were her chair and her bed, and if I scatter them there, I'd be sneezing great aunt Maud for years to come.
So, thanks very much for that, Katrina, for telling us a little bit about the background to Eggshells and a little bit about your life and your future projects. I think now it's time to move on to the Toaster Challenge. So, Katrina's been asked to choose a book that has moved her or touched her in some way, and she's going to talk about it for 2 minutes, the length of time it takes to make a slice of toast. So, I hope you're ready, Katrina. Ready? The bread is going down. So, let's get started. 1, 2, 3, and the toast is down.
Okay, so I picked Mirror Shoulder Signal by this Danish author called Dorthe Nors. And it was published 3 years ago, shortlisted for the Man Booker International. And it's about Sonia, a woman, she's in her 40s and she's learning to drive. And that really appealed to me because I'm in my 40s and haven't yet learned to drive. So this is a misfit I can identify with. She's in her theory class with younger learners, feeling like a failure. And the first driving instructor won't let her actually drive. It's just an angry, kind of racist, kind of strange person who babbles away about her problems. Then she gets the next driving instructor, and he's a bit of a lech. So this whole experience is fairly fraught for her. And the rest of her life isn't going amazingly either. She's lonely, has a bad relationship with her sister, and her job is translating this Swedish crime novelist into Danish. And she's very funny on the body counts and all the bodily fluents involved in these kind of books and the people who read them. So this woman, she's a bit of a misfit. That's what appealed to me about her. I just love misfits, and she's completely nonconformist. She's from rural Denmark and is kind of struggling in Copenhagen to fit in. And I think the beauty of the book for me is it's not just the gorgeous writing. Like, there are really beautiful sentences, but she comes up with these kind of startling truths about life, but in a very mundane way, like linked with food or something completely ordinary. And just the way she shows we're all conforming, like no matter how much we pretend to be these open-minded, tolerant people, we all just hang out with like-minded people who think the same as us and agree with our views. And I think that's fairly topical now in this age when we're all supposed to just weigh in and agree with everything. So it's great dialogue, very funny dialogue with her driving instructors and a masseuse she goes to who's a bit for the birds and obsessed with angels. And she has a condition called vertigo then, which is a serious element. It kind of adds a bit of unease to it because you never know when she's going to actually faint, and she does kind of collapse at moments of high pressure throughout the book. So there's this real good balance of, I think, good and very funny and light-hearted funny and serious, a bit of darkness, an edge to it. So my favourite book at the moment.
Oh, well done. Thanks, Caitriona. Caitriona was talking about Mirror Shoulder Signal by Dorothy Norris. And just listening to you there, Caitriona, it sounds like a really quirky read. It sounds a little bit like Vivian, also a nonconformist kind of character.
As soon as I started talking, I thought of that. It's a bit narcissistic of me to pick a similar character.
Oh no, I just think as you said yourself, like you like characters
Yeah.
that are kind of on the edge. She sounds fiercely nonconformist, just like Vivian, and it's interesting as well that she's coping in a city. Except it's Copenhagen, not Dublin. But this is Dorothy Norris's third book, I think, to be translated into English. I haven't read the book, but I'm really looking forward to it. But you were talking there about the language in it. The language is very beautiful, is it? I'd love to read it just to see. Because I know a lot of people say that she's such an experimental writer. I'd love to see the kind of language that she's using. Did you enjoyed that?
Yeah, I think I did. I think, like, I haven't examples on me now, but I think what she seems to do is she puts two completely unrelated things in a sentence. So she'd have some really kind of profound truth and then talk about what's in the fridge or something, like in the same sentence. And that works brilliantly, I think. It takes the depth out of it a bit, or it doesn't make it too heavy to read.
And I love that idea that we all are conforming, even though we think we're not. So that was Caitriona Lally talking about Mirror Shoulder Signal by Dorothy Norris. It's published by Pushkin, which is an amazing press. And Caitriona was also talking, of course, about her own novel, Eggshells, published by the Borough Press. So as usual, details of all books are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, all the usual podcast apps, and on booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. Thanks, Caitriona.
Thanks a million, Enda. Great to be on.
Ignorant in the sense she ate monotonous food and thought the world was flat, and pagan in the sense she knew the things that moved at night are neither dogs nor cats, but pukas and dark-faced men. She nevertheless had fierce pride, but sentenced in the end to eat thin, diminishing porridge in a stone-cold kitchen, she clenched her brittle hands around a world she could not understand. I loved her from the day she died. She was a summer dance at the crossroads. She was a card game where a nose was broken. She was a song that nobody sings. She was a house ransacked by soldiers. She was a language seldom spoken. She was a child's purse full of useless things.
So that was Michael Hartnett reading Death of an Irishwoman for Pat Collins' 1999 documentary on the poet, A Necklace of Wrens. And it seems as good a place as any to start a conversation about what Michael Hartnett's work meant and continues to mean today.
Yeah, I think Death of an Irishwoman is a very, very good place to start. because it's such an absolutely wonderful poem. Michael Hartnett was in Morocco in 1965 when his grandmother, Bridget Halpin, died, and she was enormously important to him as he'd spent his formative years in her really simple cottage in Camas in Limerick, soaking up the folklore and stories of the area. And I think in this poem there's a huge sense of regret for a lost generation. Bridget Halpin was born in 1885, and that was a time of cultural renewal when you think of it, with the foundation of the Gaelic League and the Gaelic Athletic Association. And you really feel in Death of an Irish Woman that she's a symbol of times lost. I mean, she never took on board the changes of the 1920s and 30s in New Ireland. And even though her life spanned 2 centuries, I think Michael Hartnett very much saw her as out of time. To her, for instance, in the poem, he tells us the world was flat and pagan, and she clenched her brittle hands around a world she couldn't understand.
To me, the crucial line is, I loved her from the day she died. I think it's one of the great lines in Irish poetry.
He didn't make it to her funeral, and he was apologising to her, isn't that it? But I love the lists of metaphors at the end. She was a summer dance at the crossroads, a card game. I just love that. I love the way, you get that sense that these times are being lost, the dances, the stories, the card games, and the relentless change of the modern world. It was too much for her. And I think you really get a sense of that at the end.
I mean, he's somebody that obviously we've both been reading for a long time, as long as we've been reading poetry. And I think, there's so many Michael Hartnetts. There is the balladeer, the satirist, the love poet, the translator, the poet in Irish as well as in English. There's, Micheál Ó Hartnaide as well as Michael Hartnett. You might wonder, where's the real Michael Hartnett or Micheál Ó Hartnaide? Is it the Hartnett of that precocious early poetry? Is it the Hartnett of the Tau, or the reconfiguring, if you like, of Lorca's gypsy ballads? Or is it the Hartnett that reaches his maturity just as he's about to make a big theatrical exit from the English language? Or the poet who writes Irica Brick or On Furgoid or Donula Fina Chreen and so on? The poet who comes down from the mountain and then back into the working class suburb of Inchicore to write a big and brilliant extended haiku sequence in English, Inchicore haiku, And I suppose the truth is that he was actually all of these. I mean, he's the sum of all these, in a way, kind of identity shifts. We have to kind of take them all into consideration when we talk about him.
Yeah, because, I suppose the overall picture is of a complex, really restless and very rewarding poet. I like the poem that opens the collected poems, A Small Farm. You know that poem, Peter, don't you?
Sure.
All the perversions of the soul I learnt on a small farm, how to do the neighbours harm by magic, how to hate.
Yeah, I think that's a really characteristic note. I mean, like on one level, it's like the classic Irish rural poem of bleak memory, but it conjures up a kind of rural Ireland that's a bit miserable. They're these kind of stripped sort of poems full of birds and old women, poems about the poet and his craft.
He actually looked like a little bird. I used to always think myself when you'd meet him, this small,
Sure, he did.
little beady-eyed man. I remember meeting him in the late 1980s, I think, early 1990s, in the Leeson Lounge, bar, because he lived close by in Dartmouth Square. So he was, when I was growing up as a young poet anyway, he was very much a figure about town,
Likewise. I remember meeting him. Oh, yeah, well, I met him lots of times. I think the first time was when I was just in college, and we were organising a thing called Eggshells at Trínáide, and I brought Michael Hartnett up from Temple Glanton, where he was living at the time, and met him and was enormously impressed by him. And he read, and to me he was the very model of what a poet kind of should be.
Yeah, he was always, I always felt he was very peculiar and interesting because he seemed to balance between the modern world and the bardic tradition. Would you say that that's true?
He saw himself as the inheritor of Yeats. I remember him saying, when I met him that time, there was me, or there was Yeats, and then there was me, kind of thing. It was almost like a line of unbroken succession between, him and Yeats.
Him and Yeats. Yeah, actually, I remember once I was sitting beside him in the Leeson Lounge and he had a stick, and I said to him, "Where did you get that stick, Michael?" And he said, "Oh, I got that in Cool Park." And that was kind of a reference back to the Yeats that you're speaking of there, that unbroken tradition between him and the great master.
But just to go back at it, because you mentioned that, I mean, we started off with, Deaf and Irish Woman, and I think one of the most powerful early poems is another one about the same woman, For My Grandmother, Bridget Halpin. And, in that, like he says, you died in utter loneliness, your acres left to the childless. You never saw the animals of God, and no flowers under your feet. So there's this kind of, there's a big part of his identity is caught up in his grandmother and his grandmother's Ireland, as you mentioned there at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of like a secret language to her. Like, she didn't actually speak Irish to him either. Sure, she didn't, even though it was there that he'd be sleeping up in her cottage and listening to her talking to her cronies, Oscuelga. Isn't that right? But to him, she only spoke the odd splattering of Irish. And yet that was enough.
There was a certain amount of Irish left. I mean, not much. And as you say, she didn't speak it to him, but only to her own sort of cronies. And he'd be there, so he says, in the attic listening and picking up the bits that he says he didn't even realise until he went to school that there were two languages, English and Irish. Well, again, but you can see how this feeds later into the decision that he does make. And he makes it at a funny time. I mean, he makes this decision to kind of give up writing in English and to start writing in Irish instead. He gets up and he makes an announcement on the stage of the Peacock Theatre during a reading with the poet Martin O'Diron. And he says, right, that's it. I'm not going to write in English anymore. I'm going to write from now on only in Irish.
I know. And can you imagine being in the audience? It's such a dramatic thing to say. I mean, so did he not write in English after that announcement on the Peacock stage in 1974?
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, he did, yes. And in fact, the very first thing to come out of his exile, if you like, was the one in which he announced his leave-taking of English, a farewell to English, which came out in 1975. And again, it's kind of, it's a very powerful book. I mean, it has that poem in it, Death of an Irish Woman, poems like A Visit to Croom. Some of his finest work is actually in the book where he's announcing that he's abandoning the English. And then, of course, there's the famous poem itself, A Farewell to English, which I don't necessarily think is his best. It's very dramatic. I mean, what was I doing with these foreign words? I, the polisher of complex claws, wizards of grasses and warlock of birds, midnight oiled in the metric laws. And I mean, I have made my choice and leave with little me weeping. I have come with meagre voice to court the language of my people. And then there's all the stuff about English just being a language to sell pigs in and all that kind of stuff. So I find it to be slightly overblown. But interesting in that sense of to court the language. I mean, it's a language that has to be courted. It's not native to him. He has to work at it. He has to work at Irish. He has to learn his way into the kind of tradition and writing it. It's not a natural kind of thing in a way. It's a hard-won thing,
Yeah, and he also, I think, around that time, he made a strategic decision to withdraw from the city, and he returned back to his native Newcastle West, beyond it, actually, to the countryside beyond it. Isn't that right? It was kind of like very much a period of isolation for him, where he wanted to continue his studying of his adopted language. And around that time, do you think his finest work came out of that period?
I think a lot of it. I mean, he did write, he started to write in Irish the collections that became, Irish Bricken and Fergoid and so on. And he wrote very fine poems in Irish. The poems that are now collected in the Necklace of Wrens have the work in Irish in both languages, so you can go back and see it. And I think it's full of very powerful stuff. But we might come back to that at the end, possibly, because of course he doesn't stay in Limerick. At a certain point, his personal circumstances change, and he ends up back in the city, living in Inchicore. And then suddenly there is a farewell, and then suddenly there's this set of haiku. Inchicore haiku.
I mean, it's interesting actually, because if you look at the collected poems, the poem right after A Farewell to English is actually Inchicore haiku.
It's funny, because I suppose that's one of the ironies of the publication, in that obviously that collective poems is only his collective poems in English, so it makes it look like he's kind of making this big gesture and then repudiating it, because obviously all the Irish poems are collected separately. But I love Inchicore haiku. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, the empty pockets, old bills pounding on the door. Are these my people, all divided up, all taught to hate each other? Are these my people? My dead father shouts from his eternal labour. These are your people. He's always looking for people. He's always looking for a community to be kind of faithful to in some way. But they're very funny and witty as well. And, you know, they're all kind of, and in fact, I have to say, because many years ago, Pat Bourne and myself persuaded him to record those poems for a CD that we were making called Dublin 15 Poems of the City. And we picked him up at his flat in Dartmouth Square, and we brought him out to RTE to record in a studio there. And the only problem was he'd forgotten his glasses, and so I remember Pat had to go and magnify the poem by 500% and bring it into the studio so Michael could actually see his but it's the only recording that's extant of him reading that. So I'm really glad to have done that.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I remember that time, and I remember when you were recording it, it's incredible that you got Michael Hartnett reading Inchicore haiku, and such a brilliant resource to still be there. Dublin 15, a CD. I think it's still available, is it, Peter?
It's out there somewhere.
Now in Inchicore, my cigarette smoke rises like lonesome pub talk.
Down in Glendara, noises wake an anxious house. I hear the doors slam. My English dam bursts, and out stroll all my bastards. Irish shakes its head. I love that one.
And what about stalking? Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, that's one of my favourite lines. Or stalking Emmet Road, a shocked rook blessed me with crusts.
Manna for the dead, yeah.
Manna for the
or,
dead.
I push in a plug.
Brilliant.
Mozart comes into the room riding a cello.
And this one always makes me hungry. In local chippers, sad cod dream in fresh batter, the Atlantic cries.
Ah, yeah, they're all
brilliant.
They're all brilliant. They're all brilliant.
It's very hard as well not to cycle. I often cycle through Inchicore, and I pass St. Michael's Church and I see his house with a plaque up, which is amazing. There's a plaque up thanks to, I think, very dedicated writers in Inchicore. And I like the one that says, from St. Michael's Church, the Electric Angelus, another job gone. And Peter, we haven't yet spoken about his translations either.
No, indeed, because after Inchicore haiku, he continued to write and publish in English. But also he took on, the forceful, angry kind of Gaelic poets writing at the end of the old order, like Egon Rahal and Dovio Brother and Porgin Hackard. And, these were kind of, in a way, kindred spirits for Hartnett. They were also poets sort of adrift in a world which didn't have much time for them or for their art. As he says, the once proud men of this land have swapped giving for gaming, culture for crap. No tunes on the pipes, no music on harps. We ourselves have buried the summer at last. So that's in his version of Dovie Ó Brother. So, I mean, these poets with their immense dignity and immense bitterness had clung to their own faith in poetry. And his translations, they're really kind of crafted and careful. And and they have all the kind of slightly dogged and cantankerous tone of the originals, but they're brilliantly sort of contemporary as well. I just wanted to give a shout out for those translations, and they're all still available.
It's superb stuff, isn't it?
Something that Seamus Heaney actually said about him. He said Michael Hartnett's inspirations affected Irish poetry the way a power surge affects the grid. Things quickened and shone when he published. I think that really gets a sense of what he was like as a man, as a poet,
There's really, I think in that quote you get a sense of the kind of unmissable shadow cast by his spirit on the landscape of Irish poetry and the 20th century. And I think it's probably that spirit is, maybe I'm right or wrong about this, which is best caught in a poem that I really love called Necklace of Wrens. And I was wondering, would it be nice to end on our appraisal?
Let's end with him reading it. He wrote it in Irish as Muinca Drolini, and we have a recording from that same Pat Collins documentary of him reading Muinca Drolini in Irish. And so we might hear that, and then we can hear you reading it in English.
Okay.
I my vocal og, fado, daim she is ned. Bhí na gearcha clúfa fásta is iad a scred. Derek sheed, is tooling a richt mocht. Rum sa bhí wink clóibh sa bhónéir fliuch. Ní gine mé ach géig crín nó caran cloch. Ach untas crua ná bhra siad ag búla faoi mocht. Den an lá húling céird a élíonn ó mós, is dag a nigne, forba orb ná leisach fós. Cúsáile go dtí me chean áthir, agus dúirt me lé, Granny, the baby wrens landed on my chest, and she said to me in English, aha, you're going to be a poet. Yes, and Tom Shane Nish, Shane O'Shaq.
A Necklace of Wrens for Micheál Ó Cíormhaich Fille. When I was very young, I found a nest. Its chirping young were fully fledged. They rose and realighted round my neck, made in the wet meadow a feather necklet. To them I was not human, but a stone or tree. I felt a sharp wonder they could not feel. That was when the craft came, which demands respect. Their talons left on me, scars not healed yet.
What a fine poem, and thanks, Anna, for reading that. So we were talking about Michael Hartnett, and his poems can be had from Gallery Press, publishes collected poems, indeed also A Necklace of Wrens that Enda was reading from. And the poems by Michael Hartnett that we quoted here today are by kind permission of the estate of Michael Hartnett and the Gallery Press.
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again next Thursday morning. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.